What if I told you that for the past 7 days, you've been accidentally ordering poverty with every sentence that comes out of your mouth? That right now, in this very moment, the words running through your head about money are either programming abundance into your life or cementing another year of financial struggle, and you have absolutely no idea which one it is. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share with you isn't another motivational speech about thinking positive or working harder. This is about a hidden mechanism that's been operating in your life since childhood, a linguistic code that determines whether money flows toward you or runs away from you. And it all happens through the seemingly innocent words you speak every single day. Here's what nobody prepared you for. Every time you've said, "I can't afford it," every time you've thought money is tight, every time you've declared, "I'll never get ahead," you weren't just expressing frustration or describing your current situation. You were issuing commands, actual energetic instructions that the universe receives with the same precision as a computer executing code. And those commands? They've been creating the exact financial reality you've been desperately trying to escape. Has this ever happened to you? You work hard, you follow all the advice, you do everything you're supposed to do, and yet somehow, at the end of every month, you're right back where you started, maybe even worse off than before. The conventional wisdom tells you to budget better, to hustle harder, to cut expenses. But what if the real problem has nothing to do with any of that? What if your financial struggle is happening because of a linguistic pattern you inherited before you could even question it? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. There's a sacred manuscript that's been circulating quietly among those who understand how wealth actually works, and it reveals something that sounds almost too simple to be true. Money doesn't respond to your actions, your education, or even how hard you work. Money responds to a frequency, a specific vibrational signal that you broadcast through the words you speak and the internal dialogue, running constantly in the background of your mind. And here's the part that might surprise you. This frequency can be completely reprogrammed in just 7 days. I'm not talking about affirmations that make you feel good temporarily, but change nothing permanently. I'm talking about a systematic rewiring of the linguistic operating system that's been running your financial life on autopilot, creating the same results year after year. Because nobody ever taught you that your words are not just expressions of reality. They're commands that create reality. What you're about to discover in the next few minutes will fundamentally shift how you understand the relationship between language and money, and why the wealthy seem to attract prosperity effortlessly, while others struggle endlessly despite working twice as hard. The difference isn't talent, luck, or privilege. The difference is in the verbal architecture they've been operating from since childhood. It's in the invisible blueprint of language that shapes every financial decision before conscious thought even enters the picture. And this blueprint, this operating system that's been running your entire financial life, was installed in you before you had any choice in the matter. Think back to your earliest memories around money. What did you hear at the dinner table when bills arrived? What phrases echoed through your household when someone mentioned something expensive? Chances are you absorbed statements like, "We can't afford that," "Money doesn't grow on trees," "You have to work yourself to the bone to get anywhere." These weren't just casual observations your parents were making. They were installing software into your developing consciousness, programming you with a specific relationship to wealth that you've been unconsciously executing ever since. The hidden truth is that there exists a manuscript, a body of knowledge that's been deliberately kept out of mainstream awareness for over a century. Not because it's complicated or requires special intelligence to understand, but precisely because it's so simple and so powerful that those who first discovered it made a calculated decision to keep it circulating only among those they trusted. They understood something profound. Whoever masters the art of commanding wealth through words holds a form of power that completely transcends traditional financial strategies. It's a power that doesn't depend on your job, your education, your connections, or even the economy. It depends entirely on the linguistic frequency you're broadcasting every moment of every day. This manuscript emerged from an unusual journey. A man who had everything, who seemed to have figured out the formula for prosperity, suddenly lost it all in a financial collapse that left him with nothing. But instead of spending the rest of his life trying to rebuild using the same methods, he did something remarkable. He disappeared. For 7 years, he withdrew completely from society, not in defeat or depression, but in search of something deeper than money itself. He wanted to understand the invisible mechanics, the hidden architecture that determines why some people magnetize abundance, while others, despite doing everything right, remain perpetually stuck in limitation. If this resonates with you, subscribe to this channel. We explore the hidden mechanics of prosperity that most people never discover. What he uncovered during those years of isolation wasn't another investment strategy or business model. He discovered that wealth doesn't travel from the external world inward. It originates from consciousness and expresses itself outward. Every dollar you've ever earned, every opportunity that's come your way, every financial breakthrough you've experienced has been a direct manifestation of the vibrational state you were broadcasting through your words and deepest beliefs at that time. The problem is that most of us are broadcasting from a contaminated signal, one that was programmed into us long before we understood what was happening. You didn't emerge into this world believing that money is difficult to obtain or that you have to struggle and sacrifice to survive. Those beliefs aren't natural or inherent to human consciousness. They were installed, word by word, sentence by sentence, conversation by conversation, until they crystallized into the operating system that now runs silently in the background of your financial life, executing its programming with flawless precision. And here's the uncomfortable revelation: that operating system is still running right now, at this very moment, manifesting exactly what it was designed to create: limitation, struggle, the endless cycle of almost getting ahead but never quite breaking through. The devastating part is how unconscious this entire process has been. You've been operating from someone else's linguistic code, someone else's beliefs about what's possible, what you deserve, what people like you are allowed to have. And because this programming happened so early, because it was installed before your critical thinking developed, it feels like truth. It feels like reality itself, when actually it's just a well-worn neural pathway, a habitual frequency you've been broadcasting for so long that you've forgotten there are other channels available. Now, I want to go even deeper into this mechanism, because understanding that you've been programmed is one thing, but recognizing how that programming operates in your daily life, in your actual words and thoughts, is where the real transformation begins. The manuscript doesn't just expose the problem. It provides the precise method for dismantling these inherited patterns and installing a completely different linguistic framework, one that aligns with how prosperity actually moves through the universe. Write in the comments, "I see my programming now," if this is landing for you. If you're starting to recognize the invisible patterns that have been shaping your financial reality all along. The mechanism the manuscript reveals sounds almost mystical at first, until you understand the science behind it. Money operates according to a linguistic code, functioning exactly like a lock that only opens when you speak the right combination of words with the right energetic frequency. And this isn't some metaphorical comparison I'm making to sound profound. This is a literal mechanism, as real and as precise as the laws of physics. Your words generate vibrations, actual measurable frequencies that interact with the field of potential surrounding you, organizing reality in response to the signal you're broadcasting. Most people treat their words about money as if they're just neutral observations, harmless descriptions of what's currently happening in their bank account. But that's the fundamental misunderstanding that keeps them trapped. When you say, "I'm broke," you're not reporting on your financial status. You're issuing a command to the universe, an instruction to maintain and reinforce that exact state. Your subconscious mind doesn't distinguish between a statement you're making and a directive you're giving. It hears, "I'm broke," and immediately begins orchestrating your decisions, your perceptions, your opportunities to ensure that declaration remains true. This is where the revelation gets interesting, because once you start paying attention to how prosperous people actually speak about money, you notice something striking. They operate from a completely different dialect, a verbal framework that never confirms limitation. Listen carefully the next time you're around someone who's genuinely wealthy, not just putting on appearances, but living in authentic abundance. You'll never hear them say, "I can't afford it." That phrase doesn't exist in their vocabulary. Instead, they'll say something like, "How can I afford it?" Or, "That's not a priority right now." Do you see the seismic shift happening in those words? "I can't afford it" is a declaration of powerlessness. It's a statement that closes every door, shuts down every possibility, and signals to your brain that the conversation is over. Your creative faculties go dormant because there's nothing left to solve. But when someone asks, "How can I afford it?" they've just activated an entirely different neural network. Questions are inherently generative. Your brain cannot resist responding to a genuine inquiry. It immediately goes to work searching for answers, scanning for opportunities, making connections you wouldn't have noticed if you'd simply declared impossibility and moved on. This linguistic shift isn't just semantics or playing word games to feel better about your limitations. It's a fundamental reprogramming of the relationship between your consciousness and the field of infinite potential that's always surrounding you, always available, always ready to respond to the frequency you're transmitting. When you speak from limitation, you're broadcasting a specific vibration that the quantum field receives as an instruction. That field, which scientists now understand is not empty space, but a living matrix of possibility, organizes circumstances and outcomes that match your transmission with mathematical precision. The wealthy, whether they consciously understand this mechanism or not, have been trained since childhood to speak a language of expansion rather than contraction. It's not that they never face financial challenges or difficult decisions. It's that their default linguistic response to those challenges operates from a completely different premise. They assume solutions exist. They assume resources are accessible. They assume their next opportunity is already on its way, and because they speak from that assumption consistently, their reality organizes itself to confirm it. What the manuscript makes devastatingly clear is that you're already using this mechanism. You can't turn it off. Every word you speak about money is either opening pathways to prosperity or reinforcing walls of limitation. There is no neutral ground. You're either commanding expansion or commanding contraction, and this happens whether you're aware of it or not, whether you believe it or completely dismiss it as nonsense. The field responds to your frequency, not to your skepticism about whether the field exists. The transformation journey begins the moment you become conscious of the linguistic commands you've been issuing unconsciously for years, maybe decades. When you catch yourself about to say, "I can't afford it," and you pause, just for a moment, recognizing that you're about to issue another command for limitation, you've created a gap. And in that gap, You have a choice. You can continue running the old programming, or you can deliberately reformulate your language to align with the frequency of abundance you're trying to access. Write in the comments, "I choose new words," if you're ready to start paying attention to the linguistic patterns that have been programming your financial reality without your permission. The story behind this discovery is both tragic and illuminating, because it reveals something most people never consider about the nature of wealth itself. Over a century ago, there was a man who had achieved everything society tells us represents success. He had accumulated significant wealth, commanded respect in his community, held influence that opened doors others couldn't access. By every conventional measure, he had mastered the game of prosperity. He believed he understood exactly how wealth worked, what created it, what sustained it. And then, in a single catastrophic event, a financial collapse wiped everything away. Not just his money, but his entire identity crumbled. The person he thought he was, the security he'd built his life around, the certainty he'd carried about how the world operated, all of it dissolved. Most people in that position would spend the rest of their lives either desperately trying to rebuild using the same blueprint, or drowning in bitterness about the unfairness of their circumstances. This man chose a radically different path. He disappeared completely from society for 7 full years, not in defeat or despair, but driven by a singular obsession. He needed to understand the invisible mechanics behind wealth, the hidden architecture that determines why some people seem to magnetize abundance effortlessly, while others remain perpetually stuck despite doing everything they're supposed to do. During those years of isolation and deep contemplation, he made a discovery so fundamental that it shattered everything conventional wisdom teaches about money. He realized that his original fortune hadn't actually been built by his business strategies, his networking skills, or his financial acumen. Those external activities were merely channels, conduits through which something far more primary was expressing itself. The real source of his wealth had been an internal state, a particular vibrational frequency of consciousness that naturally attracted resources and opportunities without him understanding why. If something shifted inside you, hit that like button. It's you choosing abundance over limitation. When he lost everything, he hadn't really lost his money. Money is just paper, just numbers, just a symbolic representation of value. What he'd actually lost was his alignment with the frequency that attracts money. His consciousness had shifted, probably through stress and fear and the trauma of sudden loss. And once that internal frequency changed, the external manifestation had no choice but to follow. The money disappeared because the consciousness sustaining it had collapsed. This revelation turned everything he thought he knew completely upside down. Wealth doesn't flow from the external world inward, pulled into your life through clever strategies and hard work. It originates from consciousness and expresses itself outward, manifesting in the material realm as a direct reflection of your internal vibrational state. Every dollar currently in your bank account, every opportunity that's presented itself to you, every financial breakthrough you've experienced, is a manifestation of the frequency you were broadcasting through your words, your thoughts, and your deepest beliefs at that moment in time. The implications of this understanding are staggering, because it means the transformation you're seeking has nothing to do with finding a better job, learning new investment techniques, or working more hours. Those external maneuvers are like rearranging furniture on a sinking ship. They create the illusion of progress while the fundamental structure remains unchanged. The real revolution happens in a place most people never think to look: the invisible realm of consciousness, where every belief about money was constructed long before you earned your first dollar. What the manuscript documents with painstaking detail is how this man methodically rebuilt his fortune from nothing. but this time with full conscious awareness of the mechanism he was operating. He paid attention to the language patterns of people who maintained wealth through economic downturns. He studied the subtle differences in how they spoke about resources, opportunities, and their own worth. He discovered that wealthy individuals consistently used verbal frameworks that assumed abundance was natural and accessible, while those struggling with money unconsciously reinforced limitation through every sentence they spoke. The manuscript he left behind isn't a philosophical treatise or abstract theory. It's a practical manual for reprogramming the consciousness that determines your financial reality. It identifies the specific linguistic patterns that broadcast scarcity versus those that broadcast abundance. It reveals the hidden beliefs that sabotage prosperity, even when you're consciously working toward it. And most importantly, it provides a systematic method for dismantling the toxic verbal architecture installed in your childhood and replacing it with language that aligns with how wealth actually operates in the universe. Write in the comments, consciousness creates wealth, if you're beginning to see that your financial reality has been reflecting an internal state you didn't know you were broadcasting. What happened next in the story of this manuscript is revealing about human nature and the responsibility that comes with genuine power. When the first group of people discovered these principles and began applying them, something remarkable occurred. Their financial realities started transforming in ways that seemed to defy logic. Businesses that were struggling suddenly found their ideal customers appearing out of nowhere. Individuals trapped in dead-end careers stumbled into opportunities that felt tailor-made for their unique talents. Income levels doubled, tripled, sometimes within months, without any dramatic change in their external circumstances or strategies. But these early practitioners faced a critical decision. They could release this knowledge openly to the world, making it freely available to anyone who wanted it, or they could guard it carefully, sharing it only within trusted circles with people they believed were ready for its implications. They chose protection over proliferation, and not because they were selfish or wanted to hoard wealth for themselves. They understood something most people don't consider. Power of this magnitude in unprepared hands can actually be dangerous. They witnessed what happened when people learned these linguistic formulas without the proper foundation, without understanding the deeper consciousness work required to sustain the results. Some individuals manifested sudden windfalls only to lose everything within a year because they hadn't developed the internal capacity to hold wealth. Others created opportunities but then sabotaged them through unconscious patterns they hadn't addressed. The cycle of gain and loss that followed was often more painful than consistent limitation had been, because it proved they could access abundance but couldn't keep it, which reinforced an even deeper sense of unworthiness. So the manuscript moved through society like an underground river, surfacing occasionally in the lives of those who had reached a particular threshold of readiness, who'd arrived at a point of desperation or openness that made them genuinely receptive to its radical message. The gatekeepers weren't hoarding secrets for personal advantage. They were protecting both the knowledge and the people who weren't yet prepared for the level of responsibility that comes with understanding you're commanding your reality into existence with every word you speak. Because here's what you need to grasp about the system. You were born into, from your very first moments of conscious awareness, you were submerged in a linguistic environment specifically designed to program limitation into your neural pathways. It happened so early and so consistently that you never thought to question it. You heard certain phrases repeated so often they became the bedrock of your financial reality, installed like software on a computer that runs in the background, determining every output. Money doesn't grow on trees. How many times did you hear that before you turned 10? We can't afford that. How often was that the automatic response when you expressed a want or desire? You have to work hard for every penny. These weren't just observations your parents were sharing about their experience. They were installing beliefs, programming your subconscious mind with specific instructions about how money works, what's required to obtain it, and what people like you are allowed to have. Your subconscious accepted these statements as absolute truth, the same way it accepted that gravity pulls things down or fire is hot. And once those beliefs were installed, your nervous system began executing them with perfect precision. Every decision you've made about money since then, every opportunity you've pursued or avoided, every limitation you've accepted as inevitable, has been filtered through that original programming. You've been operating from someone else's financial blueprint, running software that was installed before you could read, let alone critically evaluate whether those beliefs were actually true or just generational patterns being passed down unconsciously. The devastating part is how defended people become when you point this out. Suggest that money could flow easily, and watch how quickly someone rushes to explain why that's naive, unrealistic, reserved only for the privileged few. They'll cite economic data, personal experience, all the evidence they can find to prove that scarcity is the fundamental truth of existence. But what they're really doing is defending their prison, arguing for the validity of the bars that contain them, because acknowledging those bars are made of nothing but words and inherited beliefs is more terrifying than staying locked inside. Write in the comments, "I see the programming," if you're recognizing how deeply these childhood messages have been shaping your financial decisions without your conscious awareness. The scarcity narrative you've inherited serves a very specific function in society that most people never recognize. When you genuinely believe that resources are fundamentally limited, that there's not enough to go around, that someone else's gain automatically means your loss, you become incredibly manageable, you become predictable, you become easy to control. Think about how this belief shapes your behavior at the most basic level. When you operate from scarcity consciousness, you compete instead of collaborate because you see every other person as a threat to your survival. You hoard instead of circulate because you're terrified that if you let resources flow through you, they won't come back. You make decisions from fear instead of possibility, always protecting what little you have rather than expanding into what could be available. This mindset creates a population that's compliant, willing to accept conditions they'd never choose if they truly understood their creative power. You stay in jobs that drain your soul because you believe opportunities are scarce and you should be grateful for what you have. You don't negotiate for what you're worth because you're afraid of losing the crumbs you're currently receiving. You tolerate situations that diminish you because the fear of having nothing feels worse than the pain of having just enough to survive, but not enough to thrive. And here's the most insidious part of this entire system. You unconsciously pass this same programming to your children. You repeat the phrases that were spoken to you, installing the same limiting beliefs in the next generation, ensuring the cycle perpetuates itself across time without anyone deliberately choosing to continue it. But what if the entire premise is wrong? What if scarcity isn't the fundamental truth of how reality operates, but rather a collective hallucination we've all agreed to believe? The manuscript reveals something that completely inverts this understanding. Money isn't actually a thing at all. It's not the paper in your wallet or the numbers on a screen. Those are just symbols, temporary representations of something far more fluid and dynamic. At its core, money is crystallized energy, a current moving through the universe, constantly seeking channels that can conduct it efficiently. Think about how electricity works for a moment. Electrical current doesn't struggle or push or force its way through a circuit. It simply flows naturally toward the path of least resistance, moving effortlessly through conductors while avoiding insulators. Financial energy operates on exactly the same principle. It's constantly flowing through the universe, and it moves toward people who offer the least resistance, who aren't blocking its movement with fear, doubt, contradiction, and unconscious commands that push it away. When you're gripped by scarcity consciousness, when every fiber of your being is clenched with anxiety about not having enough, you're essentially creating massive resistance in your energetic field. You become an insulator instead of a conductor. The money current encounters your fear and roots around you, finding easier channels through people who've learned to remain open, relaxed, expectant. This isn't punishment or cosmic injustice. It's just the natural physics of how energy moves through reality. Most people spend their entire lives trying to grab money, chase it down, force it into their possession through sheer willpower and exhausting effort. But that approach is exactly backwards. It's like trying to catch water by squeezing your fist tighter. The harder you grip, the more certainly it escapes. What the manuscript teaches is the opposite movement, learning to become such a clear, open channel that financial energy flows through you naturally, attracted by your lack of resistance rather than repelled by your desperate grasping. This understanding transforms everything because it means the work isn't out there in the external world, hustling harder or finding better strategies. The work is internal, in your consciousness, in the beliefs you're carrying, in the words you're speaking that either create flow or create blockage. When you say, "Money is tight," you're literally tightening the channel, constricting the flow. When you declare, "I never have enough," you're broadcasting a frequency that ensures insufficiency continues. But when you learn to speak from abundance, even before it manifests externally, when you maintain the open, receptive state of someone who trusts the flow, the entire mechanism shifts in your favor. Write in the comments, "I am a clear channel," if you're ready to stop being an insulator and start becoming a conductor for the financial energy that's trying to flow into your life right now. Understanding this energetic flow requires grasping something that sounds almost impossible at first. Your financial reality operates exactly like a radio. Right now, at this very moment, there are countless frequencies broadcasting all around you. Music stations, talk shows, news channels, everything transmitting simultaneously through the air surrounding your body. But your radio can only receive what it's tuned to. If you're dialed to a station playing classical music, you're not going to hear the rock station broadcasting 3 frequencies away, even though both signals are present in the exact same physical space. Your consciousness works the same way with money. If you're tuned to poverty consciousness, if your internal receiver is calibrated to the frequency of limitation and struggle, you literally cannot perceive the abundance transmissions that are available at every single moment. You could be standing in a room absolutely filled with opportunities, surrounded by resources, connected to people who could transform your entire financial trajectory, and you won't see any of it. Not because it isn't there, but because your receiver isn't calibrated to that wavelength. You're tuned to a completely different station, one that broadcasts scarcity and validates limitation, so that's the only reality you can perceive. This explains why 2 people can walk through the exact same circumstances and have completely different experiences. One person sees problems and obstacles everywhere they look, because that's the frequency they're tuned to. Another person encounters the same situations and sees possibilities and solutions because their internal receiver is calibrated differently. The external reality hasn't changed. What's changed is the perceptual filter determining what gets noticed and what remains invisible. The tragedy is that most people spend their entire lives trying to change their circumstances without ever adjusting their frequency. They're desperately trying to hear a different station while refusing to touch the dial. They want the results that come from abundance consciousness while maintaining the broadcasting signal of scarcity. And it simply doesn't work that way. The universe can't deliver experiences on a frequency you're not tuned to receive. It's not withholding anything from you. You're just not positioned to perceive what's already available. What makes this even more challenging is that everything you've been taught about how to create wealth has the sequence exactly backwards. From childhood, you absorbed a very specific formula. Work hard, sacrifice, push yourself to exhaustion, make money, and then finally, once you've accumulated enough, you'll be able to relax and enjoy abundance. That progression feels logical, responsible, even virtuous. It's what every authority figure in your life probably told you was the path to prosperity. But it's completely inverted from how manifestation actually works. The real sequence operates in reverse. You must first embody the vibrational frequency of abundance, internalize that felt sense of sufficiency and openness, and only then take inspired action from that elevated state. When you do, you watch money flow naturally as a consequence of the frequency you're broadcasting, not as a reward for suffering through something you hate. Abundance isn't the destination you arrive at after years of struggle. It's the starting point, the foundation, the consciousness from which all genuinely successful action originates. This sounds completely backwards to everything you've been conditioned to believe, which is exactly why most people resist it so strongly. They're waiting to feel abundant after the money shows up, not understanding that the money can't show up until they've already shifted into the frequency of abundance. It's like waiting for the radio to play music before you turn it on. The mechanism doesn't work that way. You have to tune to the frequency first, and then the transmission becomes available. When you operate from scarcity consciousness, when you're taking action from a place of fear and desperation, everything you do is contaminated by that energy. You might work 18-hour days, follow expert strategies perfectly, network relentlessly, and still watch success slip through your fingers because the underlying frequency you're broadcasting is screaming, "I don't have enough, I'm not enough, there's never enough." The universe receives that signal and keeps reflecting that exact reality back to you with mathematical precision, regardless of how hard you're working on the surface. Write in the comments, "Abundance is my starting point," if this is clicking for you, if you're beginning to see how the sequence you've been following has been keeping you stuck in the very struggle you're trying to escape. The shift from understanding this intellectually to actually experiencing it requires going deeper into the mechanics of how your thoughts operate. Because what's happening inside your mind right now isn't what most people assume. The patterns running through your consciousness, those constant streams of internal dialogue about money and what's possible for you, they're not passive observations floating harmlessly through your awareness. They're active construction workers, literally building the architecture of tomorrow's reality with every repeated thought pattern. Every single thought you think about money carries a specific electromagnetic signature. This isn't metaphor or spiritual poetry. Your brain generates measurable electrical activity with every thought, and that electrical activity creates a field that extends beyond your physical body. This field broadcasts into the quantum space surrounding you, sending out a signal that attracts circumstances, people, and opportunities that match its frequency with remarkable precision. When you think, "I'll never get ahead," you're not just having a negative thought that makes you feel bad temporarily. You're broadcasting a specific frequency into the field, and that field responds by organizing your reality to match that transmission. The devastating part is how automatic this process has become. You've been thinking the same thoughts about money for so long that they run in the background of your consciousness like programs operating on autopilot. You don't even notice them anymore. They're just the ambient noise of your mental environment, the constant soundtrack playing beneath your conscious awareness. But your subconscious mind is paying very close attention, receiving every single one of those thoughts as instructions for what to create in your material experience. Here's what nobody prepared you for. Your brain doesn't actually distinguish between a thought you're thinking and a command you're issuing. The neurological mechanism doesn't make that differentiation. When you think "I never have enough money," your conscious mind might understand that as a complaint, a frustration, an observation about your current circumstances. But your subconscious, the part of you that's actually running the show, controlling your perceptions and decisions and behaviors, it doesn't interpret nuance or context. It receives that thought as a direct instruction, a directive to maintain that exact condition of never having enough. Your nervous system immediately calibrates itself around that instruction. It adjusts your decision-making processes, your risk tolerance, your ability to perceive opportunities, all orchestrated to ensure the thought you just had becomes the reality you continue experiencing. It's a closed-loop system, a self-fulfilling mechanism that operates with ruthless efficiency, whether you're aware of it or not. The thought creates the instruction shapes your behaviors and perceptions, and those behaviors and perceptions generate circumstances that validate the original thought, which strengthens it and makes it repeat more automatically. This is why people can go their entire lives completely unaware they're operating an internal command center that's been randomly pressing buttons, issuing contradictory instructions, creating the same painful outcomes over and over. They think their thoughts are just mental commentary, harmless internal chatter that doesn't affect anything real. So they allow their minds to run completely wild with limitation narratives, poverty consciousness, fears about never having enough, never realizing they're basically sitting at the controls of their financial destiny and commanding scarcity into existence moment by moment. Every worry about bills that runs through your mind is a command to manifest more bill-paying anxiety. Every fear about not having enough is an instruction to perpetuate insufficiency. Every belief that money is hard to obtain is a program running in the background, ensuring it remains difficult. The mechanism doesn't judge your instructions as good or bad, helpful or destructive. It just executes them with perfect fidelity. Tell it you're broke, and it will find infinite ways to keep you broke. Tell it opportunities never come to you, and it will filter out every opportunity that tries to present itself, making them invisible to your conscious perception. The transformation begins the moment you realize you're not a passive observer of your thoughts, but the one issuing commands through those thoughts. Once you see this clearly, you can't unsee it. You start catching yourself mid-thought, noticing when you're about to issue another command for struggle, recognizing the pattern before it completes itself. And in that moment of recognition, you have a choice. You can let the old programming run, or you can consciously reformulate the thought into something that actually serves your expansion. Write in the comments, "My thoughts are my commands," if you're starting to recognize how the internal dialogue you've been running unconsciously has been programming your financial reality with precision you never realized existed. The moment you grasp this mechanism, really understand it at a visceral level, everything changes, because you realize you've been given control over something you thought was happening to you. The financial circumstances you've been experiencing aren't being imposed from outside by an unfair economy or bad luck, or circumstances beyond your control. They're being generated from inside, from the command center of your own consciousness, through thought patterns you've been running on automatic for so long you forgot they were choices. But here's where most people get tripped up when they first discover this truth. They immediately try to force themselves to think positively, to replace every negative thought with an affirmation, to police their internal dialogue with militant vigilance. And that approach creates its own problems because it's still operating from the same fundamental misunderstanding. You're trying to control the symptom while ignoring the source. The thoughts you're having about money aren't random. They're arising from deeper beliefs, from the programming installed in your subconscious during childhood, from the identity you've constructed around who you are in relationship to wealth. Trying to change your thoughts through willpower alone is like trying to stop a river by standing in it and pushing back against the current. You might redirect the flow temporarily through sheer force of effort, but the moment you relax your vigilance, the river returns to its natural course. The transformation the manuscript offers goes deeper than thought management. It targets the belief structure generating those thoughts in the first place, the underground springs feeding the river before it ever reaches the surface. This is why the 7-day protocol the manuscript provides is so precisely calibrated. It doesn't ask you to immediately start thinking different thoughts, which would trigger massive resistance from your nervous system. Instead, it guides you through a systematic process of first, observing the thoughts without judgment, simply building awareness around patterns that have been invisible. You learn to watch yourself thinking, "I can't afford it," or "money is so hard," without immediately trying to fix it or feel bad about it. You just notice, you witness, you become conscious of the unconscious programming running in the background. That awareness alone begins creating space between you and the thoughts. You start recognizing, oh, that's the poverty program running, rather than identifying with it as truth. You see it as something happening in your consciousness rather than something that is your consciousness. And in that gap, in that space between the thought and your identification with it, freedom becomes possible for the first time. The second phase involves understanding where these thought patterns originated, not in some therapeutic deep dive into childhood trauma, but in a simple recognition that most of your limiting beliefs about money aren't actually yours. They were inherited. You absorbed them from your environment before you had the capacity to question whether they were true. When you see this clearly, when you recognize you've been operating from someone else's blueprint for reality, the grip those thoughts have on you loosens naturally. The third phase is where the real alchemy happens. You learn the specific reformulations, the precise linguistic shifts that transform commands for limitation into commands for expansion. This isn't about pasting positive affirmations over negative beliefs. It's about rewiring the neural pathways at the level where thoughts originate, installing new default patterns that run automatically once they're properly anchored. What people discover when they move through this sequence is that their thoughts about money begin shifting without effort. They catch themselves naturally thinking in terms of possibility rather than limitation, assuming solutions exist rather than assuming obstacles are insurmountable. It's not forced or performative. It's a genuine recalibration of the internal frequency they're broadcasting, which means the external circumstances have no choice but to begin reorganizing themselves around this new signal. The fascinating part is how quickly the external confirmation starts appearing. Usually within the first few days of conscious practice, people report noticing opportunities they would have missed before, having conversations that lead somewhere unexpected, receiving information or resources that seem to arrive at exactly the right moment. The universe isn't suddenly favoring them. They've simply tuned their receiver to a frequency where these transmissions were always broadcasting, but previously remained imperceptible. Write in the comments, "I'm rewiring now," if you're ready to move beyond just understanding this intellectually and actually begin the systematic process of transforming the thought patterns commanding your financial reality. Now, I want to go even deeper into something the manuscript emphasizes that most people completely overlook. While your thoughts are powerful, carrying that electromagnetic signature we just discussed, spoken words operate at an entirely different magnitude of creative force. When you actually vocalize something, when you take an internal thought and give it voice, you're engaging multiple layers of your sensory system simultaneously. You're hearing the words with your ears, feeling the vibration in your throat and chest, activating neural pathways that process language differently than silent thought. This multi-sensory engagement sends a dramatically stronger signal into the quantum field surrounding you. Think about how different it feels in your body when you think, "I can't afford it," versus when you actually say it out loud. The spoken declaration lands with weight, with finality, with a sense of making something official. And that's exactly what's happening at the energetic level. When you speak those words, you're not just expressing a temporary limitation, you're issuing a formal declaration to the universe, a statement of identity that gets absorbed into your subconscious mind and broadcast as your defining frequency. Your nervous system receives that spoken declaration as a much stronger command than a passing thought, encoding it more deeply, treating it as more authoritative. This is why the people around you have such a profound impact on your financial reality, not just through their direct actions or advice, but through the linguistic environment they create. If you're constantly surrounded by people speaking from limitation, complaining about how hard everything is, declaring that money is scarce and opportunities are few, you're being bathed in that frequency. Even if you're not speaking those words yourself, you're absorbing them through your mirror neurons, through the empathic resonance that happens when you're in close proximity to others. Their spoken declarations become part of your ambient reality, influencing your own internal frequency, whether you consciously agree with them or not. But here's the revelation that changes everything once you truly absorb it. You are not a victim standing inside your circumstances, passively describing what you observe around you. You are a creator actively commanding those circumstances into existence through every sentence that comes out of your mouth. This isn't mystical thinking or new age fantasy. This is the actual mechanism by which consciousness shapes material reality, and it operates whether you believe in it or completely dismiss it as nonsense. Every sentence that begins with "I am" is a creative decree of the highest order. When you say, "I am broke," you're not reporting on your bank balance. You're declaring an identity, and that identity becomes the filter through which you perceive every opportunity, make every decision, take every action. Your subconscious mind hears, "I am broke," and immediately begins organizing your reality to maintain consistency with that declaration, because your psyche has a powerful drive toward internal coherence. It will sacrifice external prosperity to maintain alignment with the identity you've spoken into existence. The same mechanism applies to statements beginning with "I have" or "I can't," or any declarative phrase about your financial reality. These aren't neutral observations. They're commands being received by the field of infinite potential that surrounds you at all times, a field that quantum physics has shown us is not empty space, but a living matrix of possibility waiting to collapse into form based on the observer's consciousness. And your spoken words are the primary tool through which you direct that consciousness, focusing it, commanding it, instructing the field about what to manifest in your material experience. The tragedy is how casually most people issue these declarations, completely unaware of the creative power they're wielding. They say, "I'm so broke," as a joke with friends, not realizing their subconscious doesn't understand humor and takes the statement as literal truth. They declare, "I never have enough," in a moment of frustration, not recognizing they've just issued a command for perpetual insufficiency. They speak from limitation dozens of times a day, reinforcing the exact reality they're trying to escape, all while wondering why nothing ever changes, despite their best efforts. The shift happens when you become conscious, truly conscious, of the creative authority you hold through language. When you realize that every declaration is a choice about which reality you're commanding into existence, the words stop being automatic and start being deliberate. You catch yourself before saying, "I can't afford it," and consciously reformulate it into something that opens doors rather than slamming them shut. Write in the comments, "I command with my words," if you're beginning to Feel the weight of this responsibility, recognizing that your spoken declarations have been creating your financial reality with precision you never imagined. The science behind this mechanism is even more fascinating than the spiritual explanation, because it reveals something measurable and undeniable about how your words interact with physical reality. When you speak, you're not just making sounds that dissipate harmlessly into the air. You're generating sound waves, actual vibrations that carry specific frequencies. And those frequencies interact with matter in ways that scientists can demonstrate and measure in laboratory conditions. There's an entire field of study called cymatics that shows this interaction visually. Researchers place sand or water on a surface and then expose it to different sound frequencies. What happens is remarkable. The particles organize themselves into precise geometric patterns that change completely based on the frequency being played. Higher frequencies create more complex, intricate patterns. Lower frequencies produce simpler formations. But here's what matters for your financial reality. Every single frequency creates a distinct pattern, a specific arrangement of matter that corresponds exactly to the vibration being introduced. Your words are doing the exact same thing to the invisible field of potential that surrounds you at every moment. When you speak, you're introducing vibrations into this field, and those vibrations organize the quantum possibilities into patterns that eventually solidify into your lived experience. Say, "I am abundant," with genuine feeling, and you're introducing one pattern into the field. Say, "I'm always broke," with conviction, and you're introducing an entirely different pattern. The field doesn't judge which pattern is better or worse. It simply responds to the frequency you're broadcasting, organizing itself accordingly. But the impact goes even deeper than external effects, because something profound is happening inside your brain with every repeated phrase you speak. Neuroscience has shown us that your brain operates on a principle called neuroplasticity, meaning it's constantly rewiring itself based on your habitual patterns of thought and speech. Every time you repeat a phrase, you're strengthening a specific neural pathway, creating a physical groove in your brain tissue where that pattern of thought travels more easily the next time. Say, "I can't afford it enough." Times, and your brain literally constructs a dedicated superhighway for that thought pattern. The neural connections become so strong, so automatic, that the phrase starts appearing in your mind without conscious effort. It becomes the default response, the automatic reaction whenever you encounter anything related to money and desire. These grooves become so deep, so well established, that they feel like truth itself, like an accurate description of how reality works. But they're not truth. They're just well-worn tracks your consciousness has been sliding into out of pure habit, paths of least resistance that your brain takes because they've been traveled so many times before. The devastating part is that once these neural superhighways are built, they influence everything downstream from them. They determine which opportunities you notice and which remain invisible. They shape the decisions you make before conscious thought even enters the equation. They filter your perception of what's possible, creating a reality tunnel where only certain outcomes seem available while others appear completely out of reach. And all of this happens automatically, beneath your conscious awareness, driven by neural patterns that were created through repetitive language you probably never meant as permanent declarations about your life. This is why changing your financial reality through willpower alone feels impossible. You're not just fighting against external circumstances or bad luck. You're fighting against the physical architecture of your own brain, neural pathways that have been reinforced thousands of times, that fire automatically whenever money enters your awareness. Trying to overcome that through sheer determination is exhausting and ultimately unsustainable because you're working against the grain of your own neurology. But here's where the hidden opportunity reveals itself. If neural pathways were built through repetition, They can be rebuilt through different repetition. Your brain's plasticity works in both directions. Just as you created superhighways for limitation through years of unconscious practice, you can create new superhighways for abundance through conscious, deliberate practice. It requires consistency and genuine intention, but the mechanism is straightforward. You begin speaking different words, thinking different thoughts, and with each repetition, you're literally carving new grooves in your brain, constructing alternative pathways that will eventually become as automatic as the old ones currently are. Write in the comments, building new pathways. If you're ready to commit to the repetition required to rewire the neural architecture that's been keeping you stuck in financial limitation. The practical application of this understanding starts with something deceptively simple, yet profoundly transformative: learning to catch and reformulate your automatic phrases before they complete their cycle. When you feel that reflexive statement rising up, that instant where "I can't afford it" is about to roll off your tongue like it has 1,000 times before, you pause, just for a breath. Just long enough to interrupt the pattern and choose something different. Instead of declaring powerlessness, you transform that statement into a question. How can I create the resources to acquire this if I really want it? Notice what just shifted in that reformulation. You haven't denied your current financial reality or pretended you have money you don't have. You've simply moved from closing down possibility to opening it up. And that shift, that seemingly small adjustment in language, activates an entirely different set of neural networks in your brain. Questions are inherently generative. They're invitations for your mind to engage, to search, to explore. When you ask your brain a genuine question, it cannot resist responding. It's a biological imperative hardwired into your neurology. Your subconscious immediately begins scanning for answers, looking for pathways, making connections between information you already possess but hadn't linked together before. Solutions you would never have considered start bubbling up from deeper levels of awareness. Opportunities you would have dismissed as irrelevant suddenly seem worth investigating. This is completely different from the dead end created by "I can't afford it." That statement triggers no creative response whatsoever. Your brain hears it as final, as absolute, as the end of the conversation. The problem-solving mechanisms go dormant because there's nothing left to solve. The door is closed, but "how can I" keeps the door open, inviting creative intelligence to walk through and show you possibilities that were invisible a moment ago when you were broadcasting impossibility. The manuscript provides dozens of these reformulations, precise linguistic upgrades for every common limitation statement you've been running unconsciously. "That's too expensive" becomes "what would it take to make this a priority?" "I always struggle with money" transforms into "I'm learning to create a new relationship with abundance." Each reformulation maintains honesty about where you currently are while simultaneously creating space for where you're going. You're not lying to yourself or engaging in toxic positivity. You're strategically reprogramming the language interface through which you command reality into form. But here's the challenge that stops most people before they even begin. Years, sometimes decades of automatic limiting language patterns can't be undone with casual effort or sporadic attention. You need something structured, something systematic enough to create genuine change, but flexible enough to integrate into your actual life. This is where the 7-day transformation protocol becomes essential. The precise sequence the manuscript provides for dismantling your financial programming layer by layer. This protocol isn't some mystical ritual or complicated ceremony you need special conditions to perform. It's a practical, scientifically grounded process that works with how your brain actually learns, how neural pathways form and strengthen, how consciousness interfaces with the field of potential. The genius of the 7-day structure is that it doesn't overwhelm you by trying to change everything simultaneously, which would trigger massive resistance from your nervous system and almost guarantee failure. Instead, it focuses your attention on one specific aspect of your linguistic programming each day. You go deep into that particular pattern, observing it without judgment, understanding where it came from, practicing new formulations, feeling how different words carry different energy in your body. Each day builds on the previous one, creating a cumulative effect that becomes undeniable by the end of the week. You're not just learning intellectual concepts, you're installing new defaults at the level where your automatic responses originate. The protocol works because it respects the way transformation actually happens in human consciousness. Change doesn't occur through sudden dramatic shifts that your system can't integrate. It happens through consistent small adjustments that accumulate over time until you reach a tipping point where the new pattern becomes stronger than the old one. 7 days is long enough to create real momentum, but short enough that your commitment doesn't feel overwhelming. Before you've even started, write in the comments, "Day 1 starts now," if you're ready to commit to following this systematic approach and discovering how dramatically your financial reality can shift when you transform the language commanding it into existence. That first day of the protocol might sound deceptively simple when you first hear about it, but it's actually where the deepest excavation begins. You're not trying to fix anything yet, not forcing yourself to speak differently or think positively. You're simply watching yourself with the curiosity of a scientist observing a fascinating subject. Every time you think or say something about money, you pause for just a moment and notice it. What was the exact phrase? What emotion accompanied those words? Did your chest tighten? Did your stomach drop? Did you feel a flash of shame or anxiety rippling through your body? This isn't about judging yourself for having these reactions or beating yourself up for all the limiting language you discover. It's about finally seeing the invisible operating system that's been running your financial life from the shadows for years, maybe your entire adult life. Most people are genuinely shocked by what they uncover on this first day of conscious observation. They had no idea how much negativity they were carrying in their language about money. How many times throughout a single day they casually declare limitation as if it's some unchangeable law of nature governing their existence. You might catch yourself saying, "I'm so broke," as a throwaway comment with friends, not realizing your subconscious doesn't process humor or context. It just hears the declaration and files it away as truth, as an instruction to maintain. You might notice yourself thinking, "Here we go again," when a bill arrives, reinforcing a narrative of perpetual financial struggle that becomes more entrenched with each repetition. The awareness alone, without changing a single word yet, begins creating cracks in the prison walls. Once you've truly seen these patterns, once you've witnessed yourself issuing these commands unconsciously, you can't pretend you don't see them anymore. This consciousness you're building on day 1 becomes the foundation for everything that follows. Because you can't transform what you're not aware of, you can't reprogram patterns you haven't identified. The observation phase isn't wasted time or a delay before the real work begins. It is the real work, the essential first step that makes all subsequent transformation possible. As you move into the following days, the protocol guides you deeper into specific reformulations and practices designed to install new neural pathways. By day 3, something subtle but undeniable starts happening. You begin noticing opportunities you absolutely would have missed before. A conversation takes an unexpected turn towards something relevant to your goals. Information crosses your path at exactly the moment you need it. An idea surfaces that hadn't occurred to you despite thinking about the same problem for months. This isn't magic or coincidence. Your perceptual filters are shifting because you've started disrupting the automatic patterns that were keeping certain possibilities invisible to your awareness. You're tuning your receiver to a different frequency, and transmissions that were always broadcasting suddenly become perceptible for the first time. By day 5, the shift becomes externally visible. People start responding to you differently, though they probably couldn't articulate why if you asked them. They're sensing something in your energetic field, a change in the frequency you're broadcasting, even though you haven't told anyone about the internal work you're doing. Conversations flow more easily. Doors that seemed closed suddenly feel accessible. The world around you appears to be reorganizing itself, though what's really happening is that your consciousness has shifted enough that you're perceiving dimensions of reality that were always present but previously invisible through your limitation-programmed filters. By day 7, the new patterns you've been consciously practicing start feeling natural. They no longer require constant vigilance or mental effort to maintain. The reformulations you've been repeating have begun carving their own neural pathways, creating alternative routes that your consciousness can travel automatically. You catch yourself naturally speaking from possibility rather than limitation, assuming solutions exist rather than defaulting to impossibility, and it happens without you having to consciously remember to do it. Write in the comments, "I'm observing my patterns now," if you're ready to begin this journey of conscious awareness, recognizing that seeing the programming clearly is the essential first step toward transforming it. The second day of the protocol takes you into territory that's often more uncomfortable than simply observing. Your language patterns, because it forces you to confront something most people spend their entire lives avoiding: the question of whether you genuinely believe you deserve prosperity. Not whether you want it, not whether you think it would be nice to have, but whether at the deepest level of your being you feel worthy of receiving abundance without condition, without having to prove yourself first, without needing to suffer adequately to earn it. This day focuses specifically on statements about your inherent worth and your fundamental right to receive. The affirmations you work with aren't the generic, empty repetitions you might have encountered elsewhere, phrases you say mechanically while your deeper consciousness rolls its eyes in disbelief. These are carefully constructed declarations designed to target the specific neural pathways that have been keeping you stuck, and they're delivered through a process that engages your entire nervous system simultaneously. You're combining these words with a particular breathing pattern that changes your biochemistry, making your brain more receptive to new programming by shifting you out of the defensive beta wave state into the more open alpha-theta range. You're adding visualization elements that create vivid sensory experiences of worthiness and deserving, teaching your subconscious what it actually feels like to be someone who receives abundance naturally. And you're incorporating kinesthetic anchoring, where you associate specific physical gestures with your new identity, encoding the linguistic shifts into your body's memory so they become accessible even when your mind is clouded by old patterns. This multisensory approach bypasses the intellectual resistance that normally sabotages affirmation work. Your logical mind might argue with the statement, "I am worthy of wealth," pointing to all the evidence from your current circumstances that suggests otherwise. But when you're in this receptive state, when you're feeling the words in your body while breathing in a rhythm that calms your nervous system, those critical filters dissolve. The new programming slips past the guards and installs itself at the source level, where it can actually reshape your automatic responses. By the third day, you're ready to tackle something even more fundamental: the scarcity beliefs that have been operating like invisible chains around your financial possibilities. This is where you systematically dismantle the programming that makes you perceive resources as fundamentally limited, that creates the fear-based assumption that if someone else wins, you must lose. These beliefs run so deep in collective consciousness that most people never question them. They feel like obvious truths about how reality works, rather than programmed assumptions that could be completely false. The work on day 3 involves identifying where these scarcity beliefs show up in your daily language and thought patterns. You notice how often you think in terms of competition rather than collaboration, how frequently you feel threatened by others' success instead of inspired by it, how automatically you assume there's not enough to go around, even though you're living in a universe of infinite creative potential. Each time you catch one of these patterns, you consciously reformulate it, replacing the scarcity framework with an abundance perspective that recognizes expansion as the natural state of reality. You practice speaking from the understanding that resources aren't fixed but constantly being created, that another person's prosperity doesn't diminish what's available to you, but actually expands the field of possibility for everyone. This isn't about forcing yourself to believe something that seems untrue. It's about recognizing that scarcity is a taught perception, not an objective fact, and that you can choose to perceive through a different lens that aligns more accurately with how abundance actually operates in the quantum field. What people discover on this third day is often surprising. They start noticing how much mental and emotional energy they've been wasting on comparison, on jealousy, on the exhausting vigilance required to protect their small piece of the pie from others who might take it. When that energy is freed up, when you stop operating from the assumption that you're in competition for limited resources, a lightness enters your experience that makes everything feel more possible. Write in the comments, "I am worthy and abundant," if you're ready to move beyond intellectual understanding into the embodied practice of rewiring these deep worthiness and scarcity programs that have been limiting your financial reality. Day 4 is where the protocol confronts one of the most deeply embedded beliefs in modern culture, something so pervasive that questioning it almost feels like heresy. You've been taught your entire life that struggle is virtuous, that suffering is the price of success, that if something doesn't require sacrifice and pain, then you haven't truly earned it. This belief is woven so tightly into the fabric of how you think about achievement that it operates completely beneath conscious awareness, shaping every decision you make about work, money, and what you deserve. The 4th day systematically dismantles this toxic mythology by revealing a truth that sounds completely backwards to everything you've absorbed. Struggle doesn't attract prosperity, it actively repels it. When you approach money from a place of desperation, when you're grinding yourself down, when every action is fueled by the fear of not having enough, you're generating a specific energetic signature that money moves away from like a repelling magnet. The universe doesn't look at your exhaustion and suffering and decide you've finally earned abundance as a reward. It reads your vibrational frequency as an instruction for what to manifest, and struggle consciousness broadcasts a very clear message: more struggle. This day involves catching yourself every time you glorify how hard you're working, every time you wear your exhaustion like a badge of honor, every time you unconsciously reinforce the belief that ease equals laziness, or that flow means you're cheating somehow. You practice reformulating these narratives, learning to speak about work from a place of alignment rather than obligation, from inspired action rather than forced effort. You discover that prosperity flows most readily to those who've learned to work from joy and natural expression rather than from the clenched desperation of someone trying to prove their worth through suffering. The shift that happens on day 4 often feels like a weight lifting that you didn't know you were carrying. Permission to stop struggling, to release the addiction to difficulty, to trust that abundance can arrive through paths that feel good rather than painful. This permission is something most people have never given themselves. And when you finally do, when you consciously choose to stop rewarding yourself for suffering and start rewarding yourself for alignment, your entire relationship with money and work transforms almost immediately. Now, I want to go even deeper into something the manuscript reveals that's both illuminating and uncomfortable. Your bank account isn't really showing you anything about the economy, about market conditions, about how unfair the system is or how unlucky you've been. What it's actually showing you, with merciless precision, is exactly how you feel about yourself at the deepest level. Money operates as a perfect mirror, reflecting back the value you assign to your own existence, your contributions, your fundamental right to occupy space in this world and receive resources for simply being alive. Most people don't want to look at this reflection clearly because it reveals things they've been avoiding. If your bank account is consistently low despite your efforts, it's mirroring back a belief that you're not worth much, that your value is limited, that people like you don't get to have substantial wealth. If money comes in but immediately flows out before you can build anything sustainable, it's reflecting an unconscious conviction that you don't deserve to keep resources, that holding on to abundance would make you greedy or selfish or somehow corrupt. This mirror effect explains why all the external strategies fail if you haven't done the internal work first. You can learn brilliant investment techniques, follow perfect business models, network with all the right people. But if underneath all that activity, there's a quiet voice saying, "I don't really deserve this," or "people like me don't get to have that kind of wealth," then no amount of external maneuvering will create lasting abundance. The mirror keeps reflecting your internal state, manifesting circumstances that confirm your deepest beliefs about what you're worth and what you're allowed to receive. The transformation happens when you finally see this mechanism clearly and realize the work isn't out there in getting better strategies or working harder. The work is in here, in healing your relationship with your own value, in dissolving the shame and unworthiness that's been quietly sabotaging every attempt at expansion. Write in the comments, "I see the mirror now," if you're recognizing how your financial reality has been reflecting an internal state you didn't. Know you were broadcasting, and you're ready to change what the mirror reflects back. The uncomfortable truth about this mirror is that it reveals something most people spend their entire lives denying. Your financial struggle isn't happening to you, it's happening through you. It's being generated from inside, from beliefs about your worth that were installed so early you never thought to question them. Somewhere along the way, probably in childhood, you absorbed the message that you weren't quite enough. Maybe it was subtle, nothing overtly abusive or cruel, just a pattern of being overlooked or dismissed or made to feel like your needs were burdensome. Maybe it was more direct, explicit statements about your limitations or criticisms that taught you to see yourself as fundamentally lacking. Whatever the source, that early programming created a baseline sense of worth, a default setting for how much value you assign to your own existence. And that setting has been running in the background ever since, determining not just your financial outcomes, but your willingness to negotiate, your comfort with receiving, your capacity to hold resources without immediately finding ways to get rid of them. The bank account is just the most visible manifestation of this internal valuation, the place where the invisible becomes undeniably concrete. What makes this revelation both devastating and liberating is the recognition that if your current financial reality is a reflection of an internal state, then changing that internal state must change the reflection. You're not trapped by external circumstances beyond your control. You're being invited to heal the relationship with yourself that's been quietly determining what you're allowed to have. This is why the 4th and 5th days of the protocol are so crucial, because they target this worthiness wound directly, providing specific practices for dissolving the shame and installing a new baseline of inherent value. The work involves more than just repeating affirmations about being worthy. It requires actually feeling into the places where unworthiness lives in your body, where it manifests as tension or contraction or a subtle sense that you need to make yourself smaller to be acceptable. You learn to breathe into those places, to speak directly to the parts of yourself that absorbed those early messages, to consciously overwrite the programming with a new understanding that your worth isn't conditional on achievement or approval or anything you need to earn. As you move through these middle days of the protocol, something remarkable starts happening. The external world begins responding differently because you're broadcasting a different frequency. People treat you with more respect, not because they consciously notice you've changed, but because they're responding to the energetic signal you're now emitting. Opportunities appear that match your new sense of deserving. Resources flow more easily because you've removed the internal blockages that were pushing them away. By day 5 and 6, you're working with even more advanced reformulations, learning to speak from abundance even when your current circumstances haven't fully caught up yet, practicing the linguistic patterns of someone who already lives in the prosperity you're calling in. This isn't fake it until you make it in the superficial sense. It's about genuinely inhabiting a different consciousness, a different identity, understanding that who you're being right now is determining what you're able to receive tomorrow. The manuscript emphasizes something that sounds paradoxical, but is absolutely essential. You have to become abundant before abundance can manifest materially. You can't wait for the money to show up and then allow yourself to feel prosperous. The feeling of prosperity, the consciousness of abundance, the energetic signature of someone who lives in sufficiency, this has to come first. It's the seed that produces the fruit, not the other way around. And the 7-day protocol is specifically designed to install that seed deeply enough that it can't be uprooted by temporary circumstances or setbacks. What happens by day 7 is that you've created enough momentum, enough new neural wiring, enough genuine shift in your vibrational frequency that the transformation starts feeling irreversible. You're not just intellectually understanding these principles anymore. You're living them, breathing them, speaking them automatically. The new patterns have become strong enough to compete with the old ones, and in many cases, to completely replace them. Write in the comments, "My worth creates my wealth," if you're grasping how this internal transformation is the actual work, and everything else is just the external manifestation of consciousness, shifts happening at levels you can't see, but can definitely feel. The healing work required to shift this worthiness wound goes far deeper than most people realize. Because you're not dealing with a simple thought pattern you can change through willpower. You're confronting identity itself, the fundamental story you've been telling about who you are and what you're allowed to have in this world. And here's the part that makes this work so challenging. You can't fake your way past this. You can't perform confidence or manufactured worthiness and expect the universe to be fooled by your act. The field that responds to your consciousness, that quantum matrix of possibility we've been discussing, it doesn't read your carefully crafted persona or the version of yourself you're trying to project to the world. It reads your authentic signal, the genuine frequency broadcasting from the deepest levels of your being, where the real beliefs live. This is why surface-level affirmations fail for most people. They're standing in front of the mirror saying, "I am worthy," while every cell in their body is screaming the opposite message. And the field responds to the louder, more authentic signal coming from their cellular memory and nervous system. The actual healing happens when you're willing to feel into the places where unworthiness has taken root, to acknowledge the wounds without trying to immediately fix them or pretend they don't exist. You have to create space for the pain of feeling undeserving, the shame of believing you're fundamentally lacking, the fear that if people really saw you, they'd discover you're not enough. These aren't pleasant emotions to sit with, which is why most people avoid this work entirely, staying busy with external strategies that can never address the internal fracture, creating their financial limitation. But when you finally stop running from these feelings, when you breathe into them and allow them to exist without resistance, something profound happens. The energy trapped in maintaining those defensive patterns gets freed up. The constant vigilance required to protect yourself from feeling your unworthiness dissolves. And in that dissolution, in that release, space opens up for a new relationship with your inherent value to emerge organically rather than being forced through affirmations your system doesn't actually believe. This brings us to one of the most counterintuitive practices the manuscript teaches, something that goes against every instinct you've developed around money. Instead of chasing prosperity with the desperate energy of someone terrified they'll never have enough, you learn to create what the manuscript calls an energetic void. This is a deliberate spaciousness within your consciousness, an openness, a relaxed receptivity that abundance naturally rushes to fill the same way air fills a vacuum. Think about how you physically receive something. You don't clench your fist and grab at it frantically. You open your hand, you relax, you create space for the thing to land gently in your palm. The exact same principle applies energetically to money. When you're constantly grasping, when you're operating from the clenched desperation of need, you're actually creating resistance that blocks the flow. You're so tightly wound around what you don't have that there's no room for anything new to enter your experience. The void technique teaches you to release that death grip you've had on outcomes, to stop the frantic pursuit that's been exhausting you for years while producing minimal results. This isn't about becoming passive or giving up on your goals. It's about shifting from anxious manipulation to aligned allowing, from forcing to flowing, from pushing against reality to moving with it. You maintain absolute clarity about what you want, while simultaneously releasing your attachment to exactly how and when it arrives. What happens when you create this internal spaciousness is fascinating. Opportunities that would have required enormous effort to pursue suddenly present themselves without you searching. Money that felt stuck begins circulating. People who can help you appear in your life as if responding to an invitation you didn't consciously send. The manuscript explains this through a principle that physics has confirmed. Nature abhors a vacuum. Any empty space in the universe automatically draws in whatever is needed to fill it. Write in the comments, "I create space to receive," if you're understanding how releasing the desperate chase and cultivating internal spaciousness might be the exact shift that allows abundance to finally flow into your experience naturally. By creating this energetic void, you're fundamentally shifting the frequency you broadcast into the world, and that shift has immediate practical consequences in how people respond to you and how opportunities unfold. Desperation carries a very specific energetic signature that everyone can sense, even if they can't consciously name what they're detecting. When you walk into a negotiation, a job interview, a business conversation with that underlying frequency of "I need this" or "I'm doomed," people feel it instantly. Their nervous systems pick up on your fear, your grasping, your barely concealed panic, and they unconsciously pull back. Deals that should have worked somehow fall through for reasons nobody can quite articulate. People who seemed interested suddenly become unreachable. Opportunities that looked promising mysteriously evaporate. This isn't bad luck or conspiracy. It's the natural response to the frequency of desperation, which broadcasts lack so loudly that it creates exactly what it fears most. Your energy is essentially screaming, "I don't have enough, I'm not enough, please save me." And that signal triggers an instinctive withdrawal in others, because desperation feels like quicksand. Nobody wants to get pulled into someone else's scarcity vortex. The transformation happens when you learn to cultivate what the manuscript calls relaxed certainty, a state that sounds paradoxical until you actually experience it. You're simultaneously unattached to specific timelines or particular methods while remaining absolutely certain about the eventual outcome. You know without doubt that you're supported, that resources will flow, that the right opportunities will present themselves, but you're not gripping tightly to exactly how or when that happens. This stance is completely different from either desperate hoping or anxious controlling. Relaxed certainty feels like deep trust in your body. Your nervous system isn't constantly activated in fight or flight around money. You stop checking your bank account with that spike of anxiety, wondering if there's enough. You stop obsessing over when the next client will appear or calculating every possible disaster scenario. Instead, you maintain the internal posture of someone who knows they're held by an abundant universe, someone who trusts the intelligence organizing reality to deliver what's needed when it's needed. This isn't blind faith or delusional thinking. It's a choice to operate from a different assumption about how reality works. Instead of assuming scarcity and struggle are inevitable, you're choosing to assume that support and sufficiency are natural. And here's what makes this so powerful. Your nervous system responds to your assumptions as if they're facts, organizing your perceptions and behaviors accordingly. When you assume scarcity, you perceive threats and limitations everywhere, which triggers protective, contracting behaviors that create more scarcity. When you assume abundance, you perceive possibilities and solutions, which triggers expansive behaviors that create more abundance. The practice of developing relaxed certainty involves catching yourself in moments of financial anxiety and consciously choosing a different response. Instead of spiraling into worry when you see a bill or face an unexpected expense, you pause, you breathe. You remind yourself that you're supported by forces larger than your individual efforts. You speak words that reinforce trust rather than fear. Resources always find their way to me, or solutions are already forming even if I can't see them yet. This isn't about denying genuine challenges or pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's about refusing to add your own panic to the situation, recognizing that anxiety doesn't solve problems and actually blocks you from accessing the creative intelligence that could provide solutions. When you're in a state of relaxed certainty, your brain functions completely differently. The parts responsible for pattern recognition, intuition, and innovative thinking come online. Possibilities you couldn't perceive through the fog of desperation suddenly become obvious. People practicing this report experiencing what feels like miraculous shifts. They stop chasing a particular opportunity frantically, release their attachment to it having to work out, and suddenly the opportunity circles back with better and terms than originally offered. They let go of trying to force a specific income level by a certain date, relax into trusting the process, and watch their income increase through unexpected channels they never would have considered in their desperate controlling mode. Write in the comments, "I trust the process," if you're ready to release the desperate grasping and step into relaxed certainty, trusting that your needs are already being met by an intelligence far greater than your individual efforts. The shift into relaxed certainty also transforms how you approach work itself, because once you're no longer operating from desperation, you can finally recognize the difference between aligned effort and struggle. Most people have been conditioned to believe these are the same thing, that real work must feel hard, that if you're not suffering, then you're not really earning your success. But the manuscript reveals something that completely contradicts this toxic programming. The most prosperous people aren't working harder than you, they're working from alignment. Aligned effort has a completely different quality in your body than struggle does. When you're forcing yourself through tasks that go against your natural grain, you can feel the resistance in your chest, the tension in your shoulders, the mental fog that requires constant caffeine and willpower to push through. Your words during these times reflect the truth of what's happening. You find yourself saying, "I have," to, or I should, or I need to force myself, language of obligation and compulsion that reveals you're moving against rather than with your essential nature. But when you're in aligned effort, when you're doing work that resonates with who you actually are, the experience transforms entirely. Time moves differently. Challenges feel stimulating rather than draining. Energy flows instead of depletes. You still work hard, sometimes intensely so, but it doesn't feel like suffering. It feels like expression, like bringing forth something that wants to come through you rather than forcing something that resists at every step. This zone of aligned effort exists at a very specific intersection where three elements converge: your natural talents, the things you're genuinely good at without excessive strain, your authentic passions, what you'd be drawn to even without external reward, and genuine market needs, what the world actually wants and will exchange value for. When you find the place where these three circles overlap, prosperity stops being something you chase and becomes something that flows naturally as a consequence of being fully yourself in service to others. The challenge is that most people never find this intersection because they're too busy doing what they think they should do, what their parents wanted, what seems practical and safe, what pays the bills right now. They've never given themselves permission to explore what aligned effort might feel like because they're trapped in the belief that work is supposed to be struggle. But when you finally step into work that fits your essence, when you're deploying your natural gifts in service of something you care about that people need, the entire equation transforms. Now, to support this shift from struggle to alignment, from desperation to relaxed certainty, the manuscript provides a specific practice that operates at the deepest levels of consciousness reprogramming. The millionaire meditation isn't some vague visualization exercise where you close your eyes and imagine having what you don't possess. This is a precision instrument designed to hack your nervous system, to literally alter the chemical composition of your brain and the electrical patterns firing through your neurons. The practice uses a very specific breathing rhythm that triggers a cascade of biochemical changes in your body. When you breathe in the pattern the manuscript prescribes, inhaling for a count of 4, holding for 7, exhaling for 8, you're doing something remarkable to your brainwave patterns. You're shifting yourself out of beta waves, where your conscious mind dominates and resists change, into alpha-theta states, where your subconscious becomes extraordinarily receptive to new programming. This isn't spirituality pretending to be science. This is actual neuroscience being applied to wealth consciousness with surgical precision. The breathing pattern engages your vagus nerve, that massive neural highway connecting your brain to your body's major organs, sending a signal to your entire system that you're safe, that there's no threat, that you can release the constant vigilance keeping you locked in survival mode. Your body responds by flooding your system with neurotransmitters that promote deep relaxation and openness, creating the perfect internal environment for reprogramming beliefs that have been running your financial reality on autopilot for decades. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to rewire," if you're understanding how this meditation practice operates at a completely different level than positive thinking, actually changing your brain's physical structure and chemistry to support abundance consciousness. In this altered state that the breathing creates, something remarkable becomes possible that your conscious mind would normally resist. Your critical faculties, the parts of your awareness that would immediately reject statements contradicting your current circumstances, temporarily step aside. The gatekeeper goes on break, and in that window of reduced resistance, you can install new neural pathways, new default settings, new automatic responses to money that serve your expansion rather than your limitation. What makes this practice so devastatingly effective is that it leverages a neurological truth most people never consider. Your brain cannot distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and one you're actually living through in physical reality. When you enter this receptive state and practice seeing yourself as someone who naturally attracts wealth, who speaks about money with ease, who receives opportunities effortlessly, your brain treats that imagined experience as real. It doesn't question whether this is happening now or might happen someday. It simply responds to the vivid sensory input by building the neural connections, the synaptic pathways, the information highways that would exist in someone who actually lives that reality. You're literally constructing the brain architecture of a wealthy person inside your own skull. The neurons that fire together wire together, as neuroscience confirms. And when you repeatedly activate the mental and emotional patterns associated with abundance during this meditation, you're creating physical changes in your brain tissue. New connections form, existing pathways strengthen, the thoughts and behaviors that support prosperity become easier, more automatic, while the old patterns of limitation gradually weaken from lack of use. The meditation provides an exact script to use during this practice, words carefully chosen not just for their meaning, but for their vibrational impact, their ability to bypass resistance and anchor a new identity at the cellular level. You're not just thinking these words, you're embodying them with all your senses fully engaged. You're feeling the confidence in your chest as you imagine yourself in scenarios of abundance. You're seeing specific images of prosperity in your mind's eye with vivid detail. You're hearing the conversations you'd have as someone who lives in financial ease. The more sensory rich you make the experience, the more completely your brain accepts it as reality and the more thoroughly it rewires itself to match. This rewiring doesn't happen in one session, of course. Your old patterns have deep roots, neural pathways worn smooth by decades of repetitive thought and behavior. But with consistent practice, usually within 21 to 30 days, something shifts dramatically. The new pathways become stronger than the old ones. The abundant identity starts feeling more natural than the limited one. The prosperous language becomes your default instead of something you have to consciously remember to use. You've essentially overwritten your operating system, installed a new program where the old scarcity software used to run everything. People who practice this meditation consistently report strange experiences around the 3-week mark. They catch themselves speaking differently about money without consciously trying to. They notice opportunities they would have dismissed as impossible, suddenly seeming worth exploring. They make decisions from a place of abundance that their old self would have considered reckless, but that somehow work out perfectly because they're operating from a completely different frequency than before. Their external circumstances haven't necessarily transformed yet, though often synchronistic events do start occurring. But their internal experience has shifted so dramatically that transformation in the material world becomes inevitable. It's just a matter of time before the outside catches up to the inside, before the mirror of reality reflects back the new consciousness they've installed through this systematic practice. The manuscript emphasizes that this meditation works precisely because it understands how identity operates at the neurological level. You're not trying to become someone new, forcing yourself into a mold that doesn't fit. You're excavating who you actually are beneath all the limiting programming, revealing the abundant being that's been buried under years of toxic conditioning about money and worth and what's possible for someone like you. Write in the comments, "My brain is rewiring now," if you're grasping how this practice operates at the deepest level of neural architecture, actually rebuilding the physical structures in your brain that determine your financial reality. The 21 to 30-day window is significant because it aligns with how your brain actually forms and solidifies new habits at the neurological level. This isn't arbitrary or based on folklore about habit formation. Neuroscience research has shown that it takes approximately 3 weeks of consistent repetition for new neural pathways to develop enough strength to compete with existing ones. Before that threshold, the new patterns are fragile, easily overwhelmed by the old superhighways you've been traveling for years. But once you cross that threshold through dedicated daily practice, something shifts permanently. The new pathways don't just exist alongside the old ones anymore. They become the preferred routes, the paths of least resistance that your consciousness naturally follows. The abundant identity you've been cultivating through the meditation stops feeling like something you're trying on and starts feeling like who you actually are. The prosperous language that required conscious effort to use in the first week flows automatically by week 3. You've crossed over from performing a new behavior to embodying a new being. What makes this transformation stick is that you're not relying on willpower to maintain it. Willpower is a finite resource that gets depleted throughout the day, which is why most change attempts fail the moment you're tired or stressed. But neural rewiring operates at a deeper level than conscious willpower. Once those new pathways are built, once the brain architecture has physically changed, the new patterns run automatically, just like the old ones used to. You're operating from a new default setting that doesn't require constant vigilance to maintain. Now, to accelerate this rewiring process and make decisions that support your emerging abundant identity, the manuscript teaches a technique that sounds almost like science fiction until you understand the neuroscience behind it. You learn to decide from your future self rather than your current self, projecting your consciousness forward in time to a point where the abundance you're seeking has already fully materialized. This isn't fantasy or wishful thinking. This is a sophisticated form of neurological time travel that leverages how your brain processes temporal information. Your mind doesn't actually distinguish cleanly between past, present, and future at the neurological level. All of it exists simultaneously in your consciousness, accessible depending on where you direct your attention. By deliberately positioning yourself in a future state where prosperity is your lived reality, and then making present decisions from that location, you're borrowing the wisdom, courage, and clarity of your evolved self and bringing it back to inform choices you're facing right now. The practical application is profound. When you're confronted with a decision that triggers fear in your current state, an investment opportunity that seems too risky, a negotiation where you're tempted to accept less than your worth, a career move that feels dangerous, you pause before responding from your conditioned limitation. Instead, you close your eyes and project yourself forward to the version of you who's already living in abundance. You feel how that future self holds their body differently, the confidence in their posture, the ease in their breath, the complete absence of financial anxiety that's been your constant companion. From that future vantage point, you look back at the decision you're currently facing, and suddenly everything appears different. The choice that seemed impossibly risky from your current state of lack looks completely reasonable, even obvious, when viewed through the eyes of your future abundant self. The negotiation where you were about to accept crumbs now feels like an opportunity to claim your full worth. The investment that triggered fear becomes a natural next step in your expansion. This technique works because you're accessing a version of yourself that's already crossed the bridge you're currently standing before. And that version has information about the journey that your present self simply doesn't possess yet. You're consulting your own future wisdom rather than being trapped in current limitations. Write in the comments, "I decide from abundance," if you're ready to start making choices from your future prosperous self rather than from your current conditioned limitations. If you've journeyed with me through this entire exploration, if you've absorbed these teachings about how your words are literally commanding wealth into or out of your existence, then you're clearly someone who's ready for something deeper than surface-level financial advice. You're not casually curious. You're genuinely committed to transformation, and that commitment is what separates people who change their reality from those who simply consume content and move on. I create videos like this because I believe this knowledge should be accessible, that the linguistic codes of prosperity shouldn't remain hidden among a privileged few. If what we've uncovered together resonates with you, if you want to continue exploring these intersections between consciousness, language, and material abundance, then subscribe to this channel. This isn't just another collection of motivational content. It's a systematic unveiling of how reality actually works beneath the surface narratives we've all been fed. And for those of you who made it all the way to this moment, I'd love to know you're here. Write in the comments, "This message was meant for me," so I can see who's truly engaged with this level of understanding. Your presence matters. This isn't you passively watching. We're building something together, a community of people who refuse to accept limitation as inevitable. If this exploration created something inside you, that sense of recognition when truth speaks to truth, go ahead and hit that like button. It's not just about the algorithm, though that helps. It's about you declaring energetically that you're in alignment with these principles, that you're choosing to stand on the side of abundance consciousness rather than remaining in the old paradigm of struggle and scarcity. There's a video right here that takes what we've discussed even deeper into the practical application of these principles, specific techniques you can use starting today to shift the frequency you're broadcasting. Click and continue with me over there, because the journey we've started together isn't finished. It's just beginning to reveal its true depth.